We have long operated under the hubris that the map of our world is complete, yet we are standing on the shoulders of ghosts. For centuries, the dense, suffocating canopies of the world's rainforest have acted as a biological vault, keeping secrets that defy our understanding of human history. We looked at these green expanses and saw wilderness, but technology is finally allowing us to see the truth. We weren't looking at empty forests. We were looking at a mask. In 2013, when Damien Evans flew a helicopter over the Cambodian jungle, he wasn't just surveying land. He was firing millions of laser pulses that stripped away the trees in digital space. What emerged wasn't just a few ruins, but a sprawling, interconnected urban grid over 1,200 years old. This was the moment the empty jungle myth died. We are about to peel back that green veil and explore the 10 most significant ancient sites that the forest tried to erase from our memory, starting with a discovery that turned the world of archaeology upside down. Before we start, drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Deep in the Chiapas state of Mexico, the city of Palenque sits like a limestone skeleton emerging from the earth. For decades, scholars viewed Maya pyramids as mere platforms for ritual, solid blocks of stone designed to bring priests closer to the gods. But in 1952, Alberto Ruz Luillier noticed something subtle in the Temple of the Inscriptions. He saw stone plugs in the floor, handles for a lid that no one was supposed to lift. It took 4 agonizing years to clear the rubble-filled staircase that spiraled into the heart of the pyramid. At the bottom, 25 meters below the jungle floor, he found a vaulted chamber that changed everything. Inside was a 20-ton sarcophagus containing Kinich Janab Pakal, the Sun Lord of Palenque. He lay behind a jade death mask, surrounded by the opulence of an empire that believed the dead were not to be disturbed. This discovery proved that Maya pyramids were not just temples. They were mausoleums built with the same funerary gravity as the Great Pyramids of Giza. Today, we've only excavated about 10% of Palenque. The other 90% remains a captive of the roots and vines, a silent city waiting for its turn to speak. Across the ocean, in the humid heart of Sri Lanka, a different kind of secret was forged out of fear and blood. In the 5th century, a prince named Kashyapa committed the ultimate sin. He murdered his father to seize a throne that wasn't rightfully his. Driven by the paralyzing fear of his brother's revenge, he abandoned the traditional capital and retreated into the jungle. There, he did the unthinkable. He moved his entire royal court to the summit of Sigiriya, a 200-meter granite monolith that erupts from the forest floor. This wasn't just a palace, it was a psychological fortress. To reach the top, you had to pass through the mouth of a colossal stone lion, of which only the massive 3-meter-tall paws remain today. Kashyapa surrounded his sky palace with sophisticated hydraulic gardens that still function during the monsoons, 15 centuries later. He ruled from the clouds, watching the horizon for an army that eventually came. When his elephant faltered in a marsh during the final battle, his troops fled, and the king cut his own throat on the plains below his impossible mountain. The jungle reclaimed Sigiriya for a millennium, turning a monument of paranoia back into a silent rock. In the dry woodlands of Zimbabwe, we find a site that was hidden not just by trees, but by the deliberate blindness of the modern world. Great Zimbabwe is a marvel of engineering, walls 11 meters high, constructed from precision-cut granite blocks without a single drop of mortar. At its peak, this was the capital of a gold-trading empire that linked the African interior to the markets of China and Persia. Yet, when European colonizers stumbled upon these ruins in the 19th century, their logic failed them. They refused to believe that indigenous Africans could have engineered such a masterpiece. They invented wild fantasies of lost Phoenicians or Arab builders, and the colonial government of Rhodesia even made it official policy to censor any archaeologist who suggested otherwise. It took decades of radiocarbon dating and rigorous analysis to force the world to accept the truth. Great Zimbabwe was built by the Shona people for the Shona people. The stone houses that an empire tried to erase eventually gave their name to a new nation, proving that while you can censor a history book, you cannot silence the stones. Further west, high in the Peruvian cloud forests, the warriors of the clouds left behind a fortress that makes Machu Picchu look like a minor outpost. Cuelap sits at 3,000 meters, a massive limestone complex guarded by walls 20 meters high. The sheer volume of stone used here exceeds that of the Great Pyramid of Giza, yet it remained virtually unknown to the outside world for centuries. The Chachapoyas people designed their entrance as a narrow funnel, a tactical bottleneck where a single warrior could hold off a legion. They were a civilization defined by their defiance, but they couldn't fight the invisible. When the Spanish arrived, they brought diseases that decimated the population from 300,000 to a mere 10,000 in a single century. Cuelap was abandoned to the mist, becoming a ghost in the trees until a local judge rediscovered it in 1843. For nearly 200 years after that, it remained a secret for those willing to trek 6 hours through the wilderness. Now, a cable car brings thousands of tourists to its gates, but the silence of the cloud forest still hangs heavy over the limestone, a reminder of a culture that was conquered twice, once by the Inca and once by the forest itself. But the jungle doesn't just hide fortresses. It hides the records of ancient world wars. In the remote western reaches of Belize, a logger named Rosa Mai stumbled upon Caracol in 1937. For decades, it was considered a secondary site, but in 1986, a single carved altar stone revealed a shocking truth. In the year 562, Caracol engaged in what the glyphs call a star war against Tikal, the reigning superpower of the Maya world. Caracol didn't just win, they crushed Tikal, plunging the great city into a century-long dark age and shifting the entire geopolitical balance of the Americas. This victory wasn't found in a library. It was found on a jungle floor, carved into a stone that had been swallowed by the earth. It makes you wonder how many other empires rose and fell, how many world-altering battles were fought, and how many kings were humbled, all within a few miles of where we stand today, completely oblivious to the drama beneath our feet. Even the most famous empires had secrets they took to their graves. When the Spanish shattered the Inca heartland, a royal remnant vanished into the shadows of the Vilcabamba Valley. They built a final capital, a hidden refuge so remote that it took the Spanish 40 years of searching to finally find and destroy it. After the execution of the last emperor, Tupac Amaru, the location of Vilcabamba simply vanished from the map. When Hiram Bingham found Machu Picchu in 1911, he was actually looking for Vilcabamba and died believing he had found it. He was wrong. The real last city of the Inca was a place called Espiritu Pampa, buried so deep in the Cusco province that it receives fewer than 1,000 visitors a year. While the world flocks to the manicured terraces of Machu Picchu, the actual site of the Inca's final stand remains a tangled mess of vines and unexcavated platforms. It is a place where the air is thick with the humidity of the jungle and the weight of a lost cause. The forest here didn't just hide a city, it provided a sanctuary for a dying civilization, and it continues to guard that sanctuary with a ferocity that modern tourism has yet to break. The deeper we go into these forests, the more we realize that the greatest monuments of our past aren't the ones we see on postcards, but the ones that are still fighting to remain invisible. This invisibility was the ultimate weapon of Calakmul, a Maya superpower that for centuries was the primary rival to the famous Tikal. Located in the heart of the Yucatan jungle in southeastern Mexico, just 35 kilometers from the Guatemalan border, Calakmul was the seat of the Canopy, or the Snake Kings. At its peak around 600 AD, this city didn't just exist, it dominated. It controlled an empire that dictated the geopolitics of the southern Maya lands, yet for the better part of the 20th century, it remained a ghost in the machine of history. While Tikal was being excavated and turned into a centerpiece of global heritage, Calakmul was a green mound, a series of shadows beneath a canopy so dense that it effectively erased a city of over 50,000 people from the human consciousness. The story of its rediscovery is a testament to how the modern world often stumbles upon the ancient one by accident. In 1931, an American botanist named Cyrus Lundell was surveying the jungle, not for gold or glory, but for chicle, the sap of the sapodilla tree used to make chewing gum. He was looking for commercial resources, but what he found was structure 2, a pyramid that stands over 45 meters tall, making it one of the largest Maya structures ever built. Lundell reported the ruins, And while the academic world was intrigued, the sheer logistical nightmare of the site kept it largely untouched for another 50 years. The jungle here isn't just a collection of trees, it is a biological fortress. Even today, the road to Calakmul is a long, arduous journey through a biosphere reserve where the forest seems to actively push back against human intrusion. When systematic excavations finally began in the 1980s, archaeologists realized that Calakmul was far more than a collection of pyramids. It was an urban sprawl covering 70 square kilometers, containing over 6,000 structures. But the real breakthrough didn't come from shovels. It came from the sky. In the 2010s, LiDAR surveys peeled back the forest layer by layer, revealing a sophisticated network of sakbiob, raised limestone roads, that radiated out from the city center like a spider web. These weren't just paths. They were the arteries of an empire, connecting Calakmul to its satellite communities and allowing for the rapid movement of troops and trade. The technology revealed that the population density of the region was significantly higher than anyone had dared to estimate. The Snake Kings hadn't just built a city, they had engineered a landscape. Yet despite its size and its status as a superpower that once brought Tikal to its knees, Calakmul remains largely unknown to the general public. It sits in the silence of the Tierras Bajas, a reminder that in the jungle, being a superpower doesn't guarantee you a place in the history books if the trees decide to keep your secrets. The scale of Calakmul is staggering, but it is dwarfed by what lies further south, across the border in the Petén jungle of northern Guatemala. If you want to see the true apex of Maya engineering, you don't go to the famous sites on the tourist trail. You go to El Mirador. This is not a place you visit on a whim. It requires a grueling 2-day hike through some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet. There are no roads, no hotels, and no electricity. There is only the forest, and within it, a structure that defies the traditional timeline of Maya history. La Danta, the center of El Mirador, is not just a pyramid. It is a mountain of limestone. Standing 72 meters tall, its base covers a staggering 18,000 square meters. In terms of sheer volume, it is one of the largest man-made structures in the world, rivaling the Great Pyramid of Giza. What makes El Mirador truly revolutionary from an analytical perspective is its age. For decades, the consensus was that the classic period of Maya civilization, the era of great cities and complex writing, began around 250 AD. El Mirador, however, flourished between 600 BC and 100 AD. It was a massive, sophisticated urban center, housing over 100,000 people at a time, when most archaeologists believed the Maya were still living in small, scattered villages. This city rewrote the book on the origins of Maya statehood. It proved that the Maya didn't slowly graduate into greatness. They exploded into it, building massive causeways 17 meters wide and engineering a hydraulic system that could support a massive population in a region with no permanent rivers. The collapse of El Mirador around 150 AD is a cautionary tale written in stone and soil. Research led by archaeologist Richard Hansen suggests that the very success of the city led to its downfall. The construction of La Danta and the other massive pyramids required millions of tons of lime plaster. To create that plaster, the Maya had to burn green wood at incredibly high temperatures, leading to massive deforestation. Without the trees to hold the soil and manage the water, the delicate ecosystem of the Mirador Basin collapsed. The reservoirs filled with silt, the agricultural terraces failed, and the city that had dominated the pre-classic world was abandoned. The jungle didn't just reclaim the city, it buried it. Over 2 millennia, the forest turned the pyramids into hills, masking the geometry of the first Maya state until it was indistinguishable from the natural horizon. Today, from the summit of La Danta, you can look out over an unbroken sea of green, knowing that beneath that canopy lie dozens of other cities connected by the same ancient roads, waiting for the technology of the 21st century to catch up with the ambition of the first. This pattern of invisible urbanism isn't unique to the Americas. Halfway across the world, in the humid lowlands of Cambodia, the jungle played a similar game of hide-and-seek with the origins of the Khmer Empire. For over a century, historians knew from inscriptions that the great king Jayavarman II had established his capital, Mahendraparvata, on the slopes of Phnom Kulan in 802 AD. This was the city where he declared himself a Chakravartin, or god king, effectively founding the empire that would eventually build Angkor Wat. But for all its historical importance, Mahendraparvata was a ghost city. Ground surveys were nearly impossible due to the dense vegetation and the lingering danger of landmines left over from decades of conflict. Archaeologists could find occasional mounds or scattered bricks, but they couldn't find the city. They were looking for a mountain, but they couldn't see the grid. That changed in 2012, when Damian Evans and his team took to the air with LiDAR. The results were nothing short of a revelation. Beneath the thick forest of the Phnom Kulan Plateau, the laser pulses mapped a massive, planned urban landscape that predated Angkor Wat by 350 years. This wasn't a primitive settlement. It was a sophisticated city of 30 square kilometers, laid out on a perfect grid with roads, canals, and massive reservoirs. The LiDAR data showed that the Khmer engineers had mastered large-scale water management and urban planning centuries earlier than previously thought. The city was right there, beneath the feet of the people living on the mountain, but its scale was so vast and its integration with the terrain so seamless that it was invisible from the ground. The discovery of Mahendraparvata changed the narrative of the Khmer Empire. It showed that the transition from a collection of warring principalities to a centralized empire didn't happen at Angkor. It happened on this plateau, in a city designed to be a terrestrial reflection of the divine order. The geometry of the canals and roads wasn't just for utility, it was a sacred layout. And yet, when the capital was eventually moved down to the plains of Angkor, Mahendraparvata was left to the forest. The wooden palaces rotted away, the canals filled with sediment, and the stone foundations were swallowed by the roots of the banyan trees. The city that birthed an empire became a secret kept by the mountain, a secret that required a laser fired from a helicopter to finally bring back into the light of the 21st century. This brings us to the most iconic, yet perhaps most misunderstood, secret city of them all. When you think of ancient cities in the jungle, you think of Tikal. Located in the Petén rainforest of Guatemala, Tikal is the quintessential image of Maya greatness. Its limestone pyramids, like Temple 4, pierce the canopy like the jagged teeth of a buried giant. From the top, you are above the world, looking down on a sea of green that stretches to the horizon in every direction. It feels like the end of the world, but 1,300 years ago, it was the center of it. At its peak in 700 AD, Tikal was home to as many as 100,000 people, governed by the powerful Mughal dynasty. It was a city of scholars, astronomers, and warriors who recorded their history on stone stelae that still stand in the Great Plaza. But the real secret of Tikal isn't what we can see. It's what we couldn't see until very recently. For decades, we thought we understood the limits of the city. We mapped the central plazas, the palaces, and the major temples. We thought we had the map of Tikal. We were wrong. In 2018, a massive LiDAR survey of the Tikal National Park revealed that the city was at least 4 times larger than we had estimated. Hidden beneath the trees were over 60,000 previously unknown structures. This wasn't just a city, it was a megalopolis. The survey found defensive walls, complex irrigation systems, and thousands of individual houses that stretched far into the jungle. The data forced a radical upward revision of the population of the Maya lowlands. We aren't talking about a few million people. We are talking about a civilization of perhaps 10 to 15 million people living in a landscape that today we consider wilderness. The analytical shift here is profound. It means that the Maya didn't just live in the jungle. They had completely transformed it into a managed agricultural landscape. The jungle we see today is actually a relatively recent phenomenon, a biological blanket that spread over a highly engineered environment after the civilization collapsed. The Maya had eliminated the forest to make room for corn, beans, and squash. They had built Bajo agriculture systems to farm the wetlands and constructed massive reservoirs to survive the dry season. Tikal was the hub of a network that was as densely populated as some modern European countries. But when the collapse came, driven by a century-long drought that turned those massive reservoirs into dust, The system couldn't sustain itself. The social contract between the god kings and the people dissolved. The city didn't just die. It was abandoned, and the forest, which had been held at bay for over 1,000 years, rushed back in with a vengeance. By the time the Spanish arrived in the 17th century, they marched right past Tikal without ever knowing it existed. The tallest pyramids in the Americas were right there, hidden by a few hundred years of growth. It took until 1848 for a local official and a gum collector to rediscover it, and even then, it took another century to realize the true scale of what they had found. Tikal is a reminder that our perception of the past is limited by our tools. We see what the forest allows us to see. But as our technology improves, the forest is beginning to give up its secrets, revealing that the empty jungles of our world were once the most crowded, most innovative, and most ambitious places on Earth. The question is no longer whether there are more cities out there, but rather, how many more can we find before the forest claims them forever? The deeper we look, the more we realize that we are just scratching the surface of a history that was never meant to be forgotten, only hidden. And as we peel back the next layer of the canopy, we are finding that the most significant discovery of all might be one that was hidden in plain sight, disguised as a mountain for over 1,000 years. That mountain is La Danta, the apex of El Mirador in the Petén Basin of Guatemala. To the untrained eye, it is merely a forested peak, but to the analyst, it is a staggering anomaly of human logistics. Standing 72 meters tall, La Danta is one of the largest structures in the ancient world by volume, yet it was built by a civilization, the pre-classic Maya, that supposedly lacked the complex social hierarchy required for such a project. We have to reconsider our entire timeline of human development in the Americas. El Mirador flourished between 600 BC and 100 AD, reaching its zenith while the Roman Republic was still fighting the Punic Wars. This wasn't a primitive precursor to the Maya we know. It was a full-scale urban experiment that reached heights its successors struggled to replicate. The sheer scale of La Danta requires us to look at the math. Archaeologists estimate that the construction of this single pyramid complex required over 15 million man-days of labor. They weren't just stacking stones, they were producing lime plaster on an industrial scale. To create that plaster, they had to burn thousands of acres of green timber to heat the limestone. This is where the logic of their success becomes the logic of their failure. The very act of building their grandest monuments likely triggered a localized ecological collapse. By stripping the forest to beautify their temples, they removed the canopy that regulated the microclimate, leading to increased soil erosion and the drying up of the bachos, the seasonal wetlands they relied on for agriculture. The jungle didn't just hide El Mirador. It was the victim of El Mirador before it became its grave. This pattern of environmental mastery, followed by catastrophic overreach, isn't unique to the Americas. If we shift our gaze across the Pacific to the slopes of Phnom Kulen in Cambodia, we find a parallel story written in lasers. For decades, historians knew from stone inscriptions that the Khmer Empire's first great capital, Mahendraparvata, was located somewhere in the forested plateaus northeast of Angkor Wat. But ground surveys were useless. The terrain is flat, the vegetation is impenetrable, and the ruins are often nothing more than mounds of earth. In 2012, Damian Evans used LiDAR to bypass these physical limitations, and the results were a revelation in urban planning. Mahendraparvata was not a haphazard settlement. The LiDAR data revealed a perfectly executed grid of roads, canals, and reservoirs covering 30 square kilometers. This was the city of Jayavarman II, the king who in 802 AD unified the Khmer people and declared himself a Devaraja, or God King. The city's design was a physical manifestation of that divine authority. The engineers of Mahendraparvata were masters of hydraulic management, redirecting water from the mountains to sustain a population that the natural environment could never have supported on its own. They essentially built a machine for living, a synthetic landscape that functioned perfectly until the political or environmental gears began to grind. When the capital eventually moved to the plains of Angkor, the jungle didn't just grow over the city. It reclaimed the water systems, turning canals into swamps and reservoirs into forest floors. The city became invisible because it was designed to be part of the landscape, and once the maintenance stopped, The landscape simply took its own back. The most profound example of this invisibility, however, remains Tikal. While El Mirador represents the dawn of the Maya and Mahendraparvata, the birth of the Khmer, Tikal represents the peak of a superpower. Rising 70 meters above the Guatemalan canopy, Temple 4 provides a view that is both breathtaking and deceptive. From that height, you see a sea of green, a pristine wilderness. But we now know that this view is a lie. The 2018 LiDAR survey conducted by the Palenque Foundation stripped away the trees across 2,100 square kilometers of the Palenque. What they found was not a collection of isolated cities, but a continuous, interconnected megalopolis. They found over 60,000 previously unknown structures. This included massive defensive fortifications, walls and moats that suggest the Maya were engaged in much more frequent and large-scale warfare than we previously believed. It included sac biab, the raised limestone highways that allowed for the rapid movement of troops and trade goods between city-states. But most importantly, it included vast tracts of agricultural terracing and sophisticated irrigation systems. The logic of the data is inescapable. The Maya lowlands were not a jungle that people lived in. They were a farmland that people built a jungle over. The population estimates have been revised from a few 100,000 to upwards of 10 or 15 million. This forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Maya built a civilization that rivaled the density and complexity of ancient China or medieval Europe, and they did it without the wheel, without beasts of burden, and without metal tools. They did it through sheer human organization and an intimate, almost obsessive understanding of astronomy and mathematics. Their Star Wars, military campaigns timed to the movements of Venus, were not mere superstitions. They were the geopolitical maneuvers of a sophisticated state. The irony of Tikal's modern fame is that it was reintroduced to the global consciousness not through an archaeological paper, but through a movie. When George Lucas chose the summit of Temple 4 as the backdrop for the rebel base on Yavin 4, he was looking for a location that felt alien and ancient. He found it in a city that was, at its height, more populous than the London of his own era. Millions of people watched Star Wars and saw those limestone fins breaking through the green canopy, assuming they were looking at a set or a minor ruin. They didn't realize they were looking at the tomb of a dynasty that had ruled for 8 centuries. This highlights what scholars call the pristine myth, the idea that the Americas were a sparsely populated wilderness before 1492. The data from Tikal and El Mirador has shattered that myth. We now know that the wilderness was actually a post-apocalyptic landscape. The forests the Europeans found were relatively young, having grown over the ruins of a collapsed world. When we walk through the jungle today, we aren't walking through nature in its original state. We are walking through a graveyard of empires. The logic of archaeology has shifted from finding the site to understanding the system. We no longer look for a single palace. We look for the field that fed the palace, the road that connected it, and the climate that eventually destroyed it. So, why did a civilization that supported 10 million people simply vanish? The answer, as analyzed through sediment cores from the local lakes, points to a mega-drought. For over a century, the rains that filled the Maya reservoirs simply failed to arrive. In a tropical environment where there are no major rivers, water is life. When the reservoirs of Tikal ran dry, the social contract was broken. The god kings, whose primary role was to ensure the rains through ritual, were proven powerless. The population didn't all die. They migrated, they dispersed, and they abandoned the cities that had become traps. The jungle didn't defeat the Maya. It waited for them to leave. Within decades, the plazas where 100,000 people once gathered were overtaken by saplings. Within a century, the roots of the ceiba trees were prying apart the limestone blocks of the Great Pyramids. By the time the Spanish conquistadors struggled through the Palenque in the 1600s, they were starving in a landscape that had once fed millions. They walked within a few miles of Tikal's tallest temples and saw nothing but trees. The forest had performed a perfect erasure. This leads us to a final, sobering realization. We often speak of these places as lost or secret, as if they were intentionally hidden. But the forest is not a conspirator. It is a biological process. It is the default state of our planet. These 10 sites, from the granite heights of Sigiriya to the hidden grids of Mahendraparvata, show us that human civilization is a temporary disruption of that process. We spend centuries clearing, building, and engineering, trying to carve our names into the earth, and the forest spends every second of that time trying to grow back. The discovery of these sites through LiDAR and modern archaeology isn't just about finding old buildings. It's about recognizing the scale of human ambition and the even greater scale of nature's patience. We are now finding that the empty places on our maps were once the centers of the world. The Amazon, the jungles of Southeast Asia, the cloud forests of the Andes. These were not wildernesses. They were gardens, fortresses, and laboratories. The forest is a living record of our failures and our triumphs. It doesn't care about our gods or our gold. It only cares about the soil. And as we continue to use light to see through the dark, we are learning that the most secret places on Earth aren't on other planets. They are right beneath our feet, waiting for us to remember how to look. As you look at the screen and see the outlines of these cities appearing through the digital haze of a laser scan, ask yourself, what else is still under there? We have only mapped a fraction of the world's tropical forests with this technology. There are almost certainly larger pyramids than Ladanta, more complex cities than Tikal, and more tragic stories than Vilcabamba, still waiting in the shadows. The jungle is still keeping its secrets, but for the first time in history, we have the eyes to see through its disguise. If you've followed us through these 10 hidden worlds, you've seen how quickly a superpower can become a hill, and how a king's greatest monument can become a bird's nest. History isn't just what we remember, it's what we've managed to find. If you're fascinated by the parts of our story that are still being written or rewritten, you're in the right place. Subscribe to join us as we peel back the next layer of the canopy. There are still many more secrets waiting in the dark,